Right, welcome back everybody. We're just going to commence our workshop session for our council meetings today. And our first one is infrastructure strategy paper with Cheryl and Dawn. Welcome to you both. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So really, this is just an opportunity to have a bit of a check-in with you on how the infrastructure strategy is shaping up. We're kind of taking quite a different approach to the format of it, just to try and kind of be a bit more upfront about some of the challenges and significant issues that we need to face that we have for our infrastructure over the next 30 years. So you'll see that it's quite an unfinished document, but hopefully it should give you a bit of a gist for kind of where our initial thinking, I guess, around some of the key parts of it. And we're just really wanting to know, are we on the right track? Is there anything kind of missing? And are there any kind of points within the strategy where you need further clarification, further information? So it's just, really a check-in rather than a kind of page-by-page analysis. I guess thinking about the purpose of the infrastructure strategy, we are required to do this as part of our long-term plan process. It is a 30-year strategy, and it really kind of sets the scene for our infrastructure approach over the 30 years. We acknowledge the timing in terms of you seeing this kind of preempts a lot of the LTP conversations that you'll be having that are coming up just around kind of budget and where that's kind of starting to head. But we kind of develop it alongside that. So the two things will kind of be integrated as we go along. I'm also working on the financial strategy, so that's another key component of this kind of puzzle. So I've kind of talked about that really. The purpose of the strategy is to identify significant infrastructure issues over the next 30 years and kind of what our response is to some of those issues. And we're required in the strategy to outline what's called a most likely scenario. So that's kind of looking at what we agree on for the LTP for the first 10 years, and then kind of what's sitting outside for the further 20 years to capture that kind of 30-year picture. And then obviously the infrastructure strategy is reviewed every 3 years, every time that we do an LTP. But it is really a good opportunity for us to kind of have a bit of a crack at some of that kind of longer term thinking. We also need to include in the strategy, when we get a bit more detail, what our kind of CapEx program is looking like from an infrastructure perspective, and also our OpEx program. So those graphs will be included within the strategy when we get that detail, and that will be broken down into kind of what's growth related, what's related to levels of service, and what's related to renewals as well. So that'll give us a complete picture. You've got a section in here at the moment as well around how we manage our assets. Again, that's another key requirement. And then as we go through the process, we'll give you a bit more activity information. So that's kind of starting to get down to a little bit of detail under each of our groups of activities, and kind of understanding where we're at in terms of understanding of our assets, our asset condition, all that kind of stuff, as well as some of our focus areas. So it probably will be refined as we go through in terms of the extent of information that's included, but we also need to balance that out with telling a really good story of where we're kind of tracking. So, sorry, I could have done that, couldn't I? So what do we include in this infrastructure? So obviously this strategy is going to be a little bit different from previous ones, because under the new legislation, we're not required to include three waters. It doesn't say that we mustn't include it. We think that having some reference to three waters in the strategy is really important, because that's kind of our complete picture of our infrastructure within our district. So we are kind of including some aspects of that in here, and you'll see that that's kind of one of our key challenges, because we also need to think about, yes, this is planned to happen depending on what happens with the elections, but also we need to kind of think about, well, what does that mean for us as a council, and the way that we kind of plan for the future, and the way that we plan for our other infrastructure assets. So we've identified that as one of our key challenges. Transportation is required to be included in the strategy. And then we've kind of got discretion as to what else we include. But in our current strategy, we also include community services and facilities. And I think that's really important, because that is absolutely part of our infrastructure picture and our story. So as well as waste management and minimisation. And then rural stormwater drainage will potentially become a new activity, or be integrated into other activities as an outcome of the Three Waters being transferred to the new entity. So we need to acknowledge that there's some kind of leftover bits that we'll still have responsibility for. So that's the kind of scope of the strategy. So as I said, there's probably just some 5 key sections that we're keen on your feedback. Are we on track? Is there anything missing? Is there stuff that you kind of want further clarification on? So we'll just go through each of those, and I'm keen to get your feedback on those things. And I guess just to kind of recognise this isn't the only time you're going to see this. There's going to be other opportunities as we kind of move through the LTP process. This gets adopted as part of your supporting document. When you adopt the consultation document for the LTP, this is all the kind of meaty stuff that sits in behind it, but you'll have a summary in your consultation document on it. So I'm kind of assuming that you've had a chance to have a bit of a read of it, and really just keen to kind of understand with the section around top 5 challenges. Does that feel about right? In the current infrastructure strategy, there's a lot of stuff in there about challenges. So we're just trying to kind of refine it and kind of think, okay, what are some of those really key things that are influencing kind of where we're heading in terms of our infrastructure story? And what is the impact that those things will have, and what is our response to that? So that's what we've tried to do in this particular section of the infrastructure strategy. So really keen across those top 5 to understand, does that feel about right? Is there anything missing? Is there anything kind of further that you want in terms of information based on what we've currently got in there? So it's really kind of over to you. I'm happy to go through challenge by challenge, or just to kind of keep them as a bit of a group and kind of go, yep, that feels about right, or no, what are you thinking?
Claire, and then Monty.
Yeah, thanks. It's a really big subject, actually. I mean, what I felt with this is, even though I did read the infrastructure strategy document and felt it actually raised a lot more questions than it answered. And so to sort of say these are the 5 challenges from that, I'm really struggling. I mean, I don't have a problem with the challenges that you've got there, but are you aware of the work that the New Zealand Infrastructure Commission has just done? Like, they've published something about an election manifesto, okay, and there's things there that they're recommending, like there's 5 big things there. One of them is about using different or better use of tools for financing. And it does come through in this document that we are challenged with funding our business as usual. So I understand that our growth assets are generally funded by developers, but that there's comments that renewals, you know, we've had to make calls on, you know, the renewals program, and we haven't done all of them. So that's not up there, because that's, you know, maintenance, isn't it? I think. And so what's happening with that? Like there was some commentary about we're going to have to change our approach to renewals, but it didn't actually explicitly say what our present approach has been and what we'll need to do in the future, because we seem to be sort of prioritizing critical assets, but now we've got so much criticality that it's not that helpful, or you know, we might have failures in places because we haven't been able to do the renewals. Yeah. And if that's because of, is it because of funding or resourcing? So funding, we're supposed to be making use of these new tools. Would it work for Waipa? We don't know. I don't even know if you're going to look at it. But the other side of it is there another way to actually get the work done? You know, take the handbrake off, so to speak. How would we do that? Yeah. So whether or not we need to take a different approach to that, I'm not sure. Yeah, so those were some of the bigger questions I had. It was also highlighted in the water reform stuff, perhaps also with the Infrastructure Commission, that guys, we shouldn't be doing depreciation on replacement value. It has to be plus 20%. So rating for 120% depreciation. So I don't know if we're going to look at that. Yeah, because I mean, obviously that's going to increase rates. Yeah, but it's a prudent thing to do. Yeah, so those are just a few things.
Can I run my question straight on to the end of Claire's, because it's the same thing, slightly differently framed. if I was looking for the top 5 challenges, infrastructure deficit's not in there, but it comes out the whole way through that there's a deficit. And so it's like, it strikes me as slightly surprising that it's not referenced as one of our big challenges.
Yep, so you'll see that it is included in the significant issues section. So we can absolutely kind of elevate that as another top challenge. And I think, yeah, I mean, it probably sits across some of those, but we can absolutely make it more explicit. I think in terms of your comments, Claire, around more questions than answers, I guess the answers are what we need to kind of work through as we're working through the LTP in a lot more detail, and as we start to kind of see a picture of what it's looking like from a budget perspective, and then kind of weighing in things like affordability and all that kind of stuff. So that's why it is a little bit hard to kind of have this discussion now, because you're not getting that complete picture, but it's also good for us because it gives us an idea of, are we kind of heading down the right track? Have we kind of captured everything that we need to? Does the story start to feel about right, or is it kind of completely off track? So, yeah.
And
just it's kind of going on from where Claire and Mike were. So, and I'm pretty sure, Dawn, you'll be able to reassure me perhaps on this, but part of all that is really understanding our asset conditions. And their criticality. And so, I mean, if you don't understand the condition, it may be scheduled for replacement, not need it, but you go ahead and do it anyway. Well, we don't want any of that shit going on. But at the same time, the last thing we want is to see our assets, you know, crumbling into disarray. So, you know, asset understanding our asset condition is part of this. Yeah.
on page 19, you say a deliberate decision was made in 21 to defer renewals. So therefore, likely we're sweating some assets. I don't really have a sense of what those assets we're sweating are. I don't know if the rest of the table does, just that just could be because I'm not here, but I thought it was quite an important piece of background to this infrastructure strategy to know what assets we're sweating.
Roger, then Marcus.
Thank you. I think that's a real concern, like more information on that, yes. And I'm probably going to go on like a broken record, as I have done for the last 3 years, because it's really, really important in terms of the development window for assets that we get our population projections as, you know, near as possible, as close to what they're going to be. Now, just on looking, particularly on page 9 in the document, and excuse me for a minute, so I've got this, you say Waipa's population is projected to grow from 60,500 in 22 to 82,000 people in 2054. And I know that we are relying upon the NIDIA projection and the high growth projection. And I asked a question earlier when we were talking, when was the last time you can remember that NIDIA were correct in their projections? But I've just got a few, and if you bear with me here. So the population projection that you've got, 60,500 to 82,000 in 2054, 32 years, that's approximately 21,500, which at compounded is 0.97% growth per year. Now, in the last 30 years, New Zealand population has grown by 1.3 average compounded. So there's a big difference there. In the past 17 years, Waipa has grown by a compounded 2.1% annual growth, and Cambridge has grown by 2.5% compounded for the last 17 years. If we're projecting our population down below any of the historical data that we have, then we're not going to be planning for the infrastructure that we require for that future population. And we can't leave it for the last 5 years. We can't leave it for the last 10 years because it takes us time and investment to get that infrastructure right. And if you say that things could well be changing, we're in a slow period of growth, fine, that's the sine curve that goes up, it just fluctuates around the growth. But currently, this year, we've got 100,000 new Kiwis coming in, which is a 1.7% growth in population. So none of those metrics support us projecting for 0.97% growth, and I just worry about that. That's the first time I got another comment on the next page.
So I think, as we discussed before, we do need to draw a line in the sand in terms of having some population predictions in place and some science behind them. And that's what we've done through adopting those significant assumptions. And that's kind of what we need to use to drive a lot of our planning. But I guess further to your point around Ahuaki as well, in terms of what that's kind of talking about over the next 30 years, I think what we've signalled in here is that because kind of this is running parallel to Ahuaki, probably through the next infrastructure strategy, we'll get a really good idea of exactly what Ahuaki means from an infrastructure perspective. And I think that would be better reflected in the strategy, particularly around what that kind of looks like in terms of future population growth and the kind of projections that we have. So, but it's for this purpose and for our LTP planning, we need to have a line in the sand to kind of go, these are the population predictions that we're basing our infrastructure planning on, and have those really good monitoring systems in place to try and kind of track, well, how much are we actually keeping to those predictions or not.
Just explain the comment that we made about Ahuaki and its impact was the fact that the first iteration of the projected scenarios, which I think has been moderated, but not moderated by that degree, was that our main centres in that 30-year window would double in population. Now, that gives you an idea that if we go with Ahuaki, then that's going to predict that our infrastructure requirement will be greater. So just going on to the next page, may I?
I think Kirsty may wanted to have said, added something there. Did you have something to add, Kirsty, in respect of?
Just through you, Madam Chair, I think Cheryl reiterated what I was going to say in terms of the adoption of the significant forecasting assumptions. I think there is, and we do look at those, obviously they underpin the planning that we're doing, and we do check-ins along the way as we further develop the long-term plan. There is work underway at Future-Proof. As you're aware, David has recently provided updates on the HBA assessment, certainly in terms of the reporting received to date and draft reporting that is suggesting, consistency with what we've already know. I was just trying to quickly look at where there might be further opportunities, but no, I can't add anything further at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsty. Your second one, Roger?
Thank you. And it's really on the two following pages there where we've got the two maps of TA and Cambridge. And in TA, you say that the growth plans that we've got indicate that there'll be approximately a further 3,000 homes in Te Awamutu, and Kihikiki will be home to 17,000 people. Okay, but if we go to our plan of Cambridge, which is really going to be the projections we've seen, the majority of growth is going to occur in and around Cambridge. And I'm not seeing us actually predicting, given that we've got a national policy statement on densification, we've got a regional policy statement. Probably I should have just qualify that. It's not been accepted as a regional policy statement yet, but future-proof will be. And the tools that they have identified in that future-proof statement is that for Cambridge, and actually for TA, but for Cambridge particularly, then the greenfield and the brownfield developments for future are going to have to follow the higher densification standards. Now, in our little plan there, first of all, my understanding was that if that's the case, then our projected large lot residential will no longer be permitted, and that as greenfield development will be high density. But I think we need to look and see, well, what is the capacity of the high density development of the green fields still remaining in our growth cells, so we get an indication of what the potential is there, because I think that they're projecting that it could be doubling the size of Cambridge, but also the industrial areas of Hautapu and the industrial area of the Northern Precinct have not been mentioned in this. I couldn't find it as an influencing factor for growth, which I think those two areas are going to have an exceptional impact on the growth demand for residential, hence new population for Cambridge. So against those factors, I'd really like to see some definition of what the potential is within our undeveloped land there, taking into consideration the new densification factors. Yeah. Do you want to comment on that or not?
It's not a piece of work that we've done as yet, but certainly something in terms of as we work through Cambridge Connections and the like. I think that sort of scenario testing is something we will have to do in terms of the being able to answer the what if type question in that area.
I'm sure Ahuaki has looked at the population impacts of that scenario for the high growth due to those industrial areas going ahead. I'm sure there's some numbers that have been, I'm pretty sure Infometrics or someone. Yeah.
Through the chair, that's absolutely correct, Claire, that we did do that as part of the development of the 5 possible future scenarios, and that one around intensification and Hamilton grows south. We did engage Infometrics to do a piece of work. You are speaking to quite a lot of detail, Councillor Gordon, and I just wonder whether we can take the concerns that you've raised and follow up with David Topman and the team and come back to you.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I could just get on top of that comment. In a way, I'd really appreciate that actually, Kirsty, because I do support Roger in his comments, mainly because we were involved in the Hautapu industrial land plan change. And it highlighted that even though all of those provisions had been made for industrial land out to 2035, it was completely consumed in 2023 right now, you know, like, and the reason that was given at the time was because the impact of Hamilton's industrial development, what was been happening there has sort of overflown into Waipa, into Hautapu. But that might not be the only reason, you know, it might be that it was a completely inadequate number in the first place, you know, and so I do think it'd be really great if David Topman could have a closer look at that. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you. And then we have mentioned that Ahuaki and Cambridge Connections are coming through with reports that will contribute to our consideration on this current version of the LTP. And I'm hoping that both of those are actually going to come out with a 3-year plan that can address some of the challenges that we've got with current infrastructure. I just wouldn't want to see those planning documents coming out and saying, well, we've got a 30-year plan and this is what it is. And we need to incorporate some of the shorter term requirements within this LTP.
Okay. Anything else on the top 5 challenges?
Yeah, I'd just like to jump in with
Claire,
a
and
few
then
climate
Marcus.
change things. Yeah, like it didn't mention fire risk. Actually, I think that we need to consider, our forests burning. And also, with the peat roads and their maintenance requirements increasing significantly, is there any mitigation around like planting along the sides of those roads, so they actually get shaded? I mean, I haven't seen any material on it, I must admit, but it's sort of like makes sense to try and do it. Because we're understanding, what some of the severe weather impacts are, which is like flooding and erosion, but fire is definitely, becoming more prominent as well. That's all.
I've just one final comment, if I may, and I've just come to my last page of the comments that might be relevant to this. And it's where we talk about private developers in terms of housing availability and infrastructure, etc. And I'd just like to see that expanded to include community housing providers, because that's a strategy that is the housing group we're looking at, particularly for increasing our pensioner housing commitment, and a far more probably workable solution than looking at incorporating it into our own.
Just with your indulgence, just another couple of comments here.
Marcus, and then back to you.
Oh, sorry, Marcus. Sorry, Marcus. Yeah.
Marcus and then Claire.
In fact, I've completely
He's
forgotten now what it is.
Then
but
I'll jump in.
I'm going.
You guys have talked for so long, he's
I
forgotten.
know it's about number 2. What was my train of thought? It's more about, I think we've done a really bad job of analysing like the state of our assets, because then we get surprises like, oh no, the Cambridge Town Hall needs updating and Cambridge Town clock's not working and the key clock's not working and stuff. And I'd like us to be more proactive about all that maintenance stuff to make sure we are on the front foot instead of on the back foot and having to, oh no, we've got to get 400,000 for Cambridge to fix the clock. When, if we'd done stuff to be more proactive about that and planned it, that wouldn't be a surprise. And like the Cambridge Town Hall would be looking amazing, and the key town clock would have been going and stuff. And we seem to be failing at that, not being on the front foot.
So I think in that regard, so I guess these top 5 challenges kind of sit across everything.
Yeah.
And they're the kind of bigger picture things. And then we get down to that significant issues section, and that's when we start to kind of capture.
I'm talking about like overall,
Yeah.
like us to be more proactive about being on the front foot of our asset management and stuff, and making sure that we know what's coming up,
Yeah.
and how much things would be costing.
So that's why it's reflected in here as a significant issue, is just around having better knowledge of our assets, understanding that kind of condition, and then looking at what our response is to those things. So just to kind of wrap up the challenges stuff that will add that infrastructure deficit, I'll think of some wording around that to the top 5 challenges. But I think your comments around kind of understanding exactly where there is an issue and what our options are to respond to that will start to evolve through our LTP conversations. So on the 9th of October, that's when we're kind of bringing back that kind of first cut of the budget in terms of how things are shaping up, and we'll start to have an activity by activity kind of conversation as well. So that's when we'll start to kind of touch on those things in a bit more detail, and can start to think about some of the options that we might have available to respond to some of the issues that we've raised in here.
Cool. Claire and then Lo.
Mine's a later comment. I think it doesn't fit in this.
Lou, does yours relate to
Yeah,
one of these
I'm
top
looking
5
at the-
challenges?
Yeah, it's about the challenges, nothing else. I just wonder whether we have to look at an infrastructure deficit and also having a look at resilience, preparing and building resilience within our, conversations or with what we're doing. Because we're facing, with climate change and reducing to population growth, but we need both of those to be addressed, I think. It's quite critical to have some resilience in the system so that we can address these issues.
Claire, you again?
So
Or
that
do
what
I go to
I was going to
Peter?
comment on the good things that we're doing. I don't know where that fits, but I noticed that you didn't mention this section, was it 17A reviews that we do? Like these were things, how we operate. And I just thought it was it is a mechanism that actually ensures that whatever we choose to do is probably the most cost-effective and efficient way of doing it. And I think that it should be explicitly put in there. And I thought RATA is another really good example of how we're collecting technical data. And Dawn, I don't need to talk to you about it, but we're making the best use of our roading assets, and I think we need to be putting that stuff in those sections where we're talking about, how we manage things, because I think it demonstrates, our commitment to making that dollar go the furthest and making good decisions all the time.
Cool. We do reference RATA in there, so I think we'll kind of maybe beef that up a little bit and also kind of talk a bit more around the section 17A as a mechanism to achieve those kind of outcomes.
Cool. Mike Pettit, I think you have a...
Yeah, thanks. I'm assuming those are sort of in order at this stage of importance.
An intended thing to be.
Right, good. No, fine. That's I'm happy about that. Some of one's about climate change. And it's just, I know there's legislative requirements, etc. And we're doing some work in EVs and, trying to lead the way there. But have we got evidence that we need to be spending a truckload more money on mitigating climate change for Waipa?
Well, I think you're kind of already in that space. From my understanding, there's a climate change improvement plan that's kind of outlining what you need to do as an organisation to start to respond to climate change. You have climate change as one of your significant assumptions to kind of indicate that, yes, I can't remember the assumption exactly off the top of my head, but yes, that there is a chance of kind of greater, and more frequent kind of events that may have an impact in the future. But you also kind of talk in there around climate change impacts in other areas in New Zealand, potentially having an impact on Waipa in terms of people moving away from coastal locations and things like that. So you're already kind of in that space and doing some work in that regard.
Yeah. Saw that about people shifting in, which is sort of population growth stuff. But yeah, I guess I just have a concern that it could be a bottomless pit that this council could spend money in mitigating something that may be disastrous, but may well not be. And I know we're doing some work on it, but we haven't really committed a lot of resource to it. And I guess my concern is how much resource we commit to this climate change challenge over the next 10 years. Because I go back to Cyclone Gabriel and other areas definitely got affected, but we're not other areas. We spent, I don't know, it was $150,000 or something on sorting some trees out, and that fell down, had to be chopped up, and there was definitely some superficial devastation, but we didn't have massive landslips and slides and losing roads and that sort of infrastructure. So I'm just for the ratepayers, I just want us to be cognizant of how much we delve into spending ratepayers' money on mitigating something that may be a global event, but I'm focused on Waipa.
Through your worship, I guess there is those two aspects, isn't it, to climate change. There's the adaptation, the response to events, But the other thing that we've done a lot of work on recently is looking at how we develop our business cases to understand emissions related to our activities, and particularly in our capital projects, investment in new infrastructure, and really understanding what those trade-offs are. So it's to me, within our business cases, I think we're actually starting to get to the nub of it in terms of what can we do ourselves with our supply chain partners and the like to start to reduce our emissions and play our part in the mitigation. From an adaptation, absolutely touch wood in terms of those sorts of things. But I reflect back on Claire's comments around sort of fire, peat road, in terms of our when we have severe droughts and our peat roads go out of shape really rapidly, they can be quite significant economic, infrastructure events for us as well. But certainly in this LTP, we've done a huge amount of work looking at how we might do a lot more mitigations through our investments.
Can I just add to that as well? Remember when we had the whole discussion around your strategic framework, climate change is one of your strategic priorities. So you've kind of already identified as a council and adopted that as a strategic priority. So you've said it is important to the district. And from what I understand, a lot of the stuff that's kind of happening in that space is very much around kind of building knowledge and understanding of exactly what climate change means to the district and what your options are in terms of how you respond to it.
Other questions? Right, moving on. Phew, we got past our top 5 challenges. Let's move on.
So what we've tried to do in here, which we haven't got in our current infrastructure strategy, is be really clear about what the future looks like in some of our areas of focus. And initially we kind of started to scope that out as a 30-year kind of plan focus, but we kind of thought, well, there's some pretty big things that are happening in the next 3 years that will really kind of, that we need to respond to. So we've kind of split it into kind of a 3-year focus and a 30-year focus. So we've kind of identified some initial things in here. And I think what you've touched on before around the key challenges with regard to renewals and all that kind of asset information is in red, because that's a discussion that we need to have further, as well as what our approach is to our CapEx program. So once those things are confirmed, they'll come back into this section of the infrastructure strategy. But that's kind of the key things that we've identified in terms of our 3-year focus. So keen for any kind of feedback on that.
Yeah, thanks. I like what you've got there. I was going to suggest to do with the infrastructure investment in growth and development that I've seen overseas. They use a tool that for new growth cells, they sort of set ratios of how much within that confined area there would be residential, commercial and industrial. And the whole idea is that with those ratios, you're going to limit the network effects of that additional population on the external infrastructure. The idea is that you should be able to live and work and get those services you need within that area. And so you don't need to commute. And I'd really like to see that applied here, because it shows that even though you have growth, you don't actually have to have congestion or increase the risk of congestion, across all of your networks. I don't know if anyone's looking at it, but anyway, I've got a really good paper on it if anyone's interested. Yeah, it's from the US. And I think that it's a way we talk about integrated planning, but actually we don't think about planning to make sure we don't have to have increase in traffic volumes and things like that. Yeah, so I think we've got to look at how people can be self-sufficient in terms of their needs. So not growing their own food necessarily, but living, working, getting what they need to support themselves by way of supermarkets or schools or other services within the neighbourhood that they live.
I guess that's kind of pretty much a fundamental principle within Ahuaki around, and probably future proof, like in terms of that kind of whole live, work, play kind of environment, and the things that you can do to kind of influence that around multimodal transport and, you know, providing local amenities and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's pretty inherent in Ahuati.
What does resetting our organisation mean?
That's what do we look like after Three Waters transfer to the new entity, assuming that they do. I've just kind of put highlights in here, but yeah.
With that transition integration to the new water services, does that quantify our liability for the new wastewater plant that could be in Cambridge? How does that transition into this? Because that's quite a commitment that we could be facing. We could be part facing it. We don't know whether we're funding it, they're funding it, or who's funding it. And I just think that we have to have some resilience that I talked about before in our planning for those sort of decisions. Yeah, well,
Our Cambridge wastewater, through your worship, our Cambridge wastewater treatment plant is pretty much committed. I mean, we're expecting to get our consent any day in terms of that. Our contract, we're looking at moving through to, to the early engagement contract that we have in place at the moment, moving through to approving that construction phase into this year and fully operational 2026. So whilst, depending on what happens, that may transfer to an entity, is going to be at the end of that investment chain in terms of it. So the debt we incur will go, for the plant, will go across to the entity, but it will sit with us until that date. So, yeah, so.
All I was asking on the 3-year focus on track, that's exactly what I was asking, not the longer term. Thank you.
I think also through your worship, in terms of resetting our organisation and reflecting back on our Section 17A reviews and discussion around an anchor institution, it's part of that as well in terms of what does that look like for Waipa, in terms of, again, those trade-offs in terms of, investment internally in terms of those community wellbeing that we can derive from those activities versus an outsourcing model that and what are the cost impacts of that.
Cool. Okay, we'll keep moving on. So 30-year focus. Sorry, I've just had to put highlights in the slide, so you kind of don't have death by PowerPoint. But there's more information in the strategy, and as Dawn said, that kind of our organisation and the community that's kind of starting to think about what does an anchor institution look like to us. Our partnerships, recognising authentic Te Tiriti-based partnerships with Mana Whenua and iwi, also recognising our partnerships with central government moving forward. We've already kind of talked quite extensively around our climate and environment. And then this really kind of captures some of the stuff that you've talked about already, is just around, from an infrastructure perspective, kind of focusing on our asset knowledge, ensuring that we've got really good knowledge of our assets and their condition and performance and all that kind of stuff. We'll summarise in here where we land in terms of our key infrastructure investment once we go through that process for the LTP, but then understanding what that means for things further out from the LTP, remembering this is a 30-year strategy, and also our renewals approach. So that's when we'll have those conversations, when we start to kind of talk through budget and activity by activity, and then wherever we get to, we'll be able to come back and reflect in this document. So it is a bit hard because it doesn't give you a complete picture because we haven't had those discussions yet.
A few comments, yeah. The comments I'd like to make, they're based on page 37 of our pack, or 24 of your report. There's some red commentary there about this ratio of spending $60 on renewals for every $40 we spend on new infrastructure. So I know I've raised that myself. I'd just like to, but I'm thinking about it in terms of the whole range of infrastructure that are in the infrastructure strategy, because I think that only really applies to things like roads and waters and maybe electricity and stuff like that. I'm not sure if it would extend to parks and reserves and community halls and stuff like that. And I think it'd be good to sort of differentiate between that. And the reason that I was thinking about that is because I thought about how we renew our community assets. And there's some really great examples you've given, like the Cambridge Town Hall and, you know, the Timaru Event Centre and things like that, where we kind of look to get a community partnership. And I think that's worked really well, I think. And that I think maybe that should be expanded a bit in this strategy, to say that that's how we'll look to manage our big community assets that you know, lend themselves to that kind of thing. Yeah, because it means that the running of it and the either maintenance or upgrading of it isn't totally reliant on rates, that, you know, you've got a wider net and more skills and talents that you can draw on as well. And I think it builds that sort of sense of place and belonging too. Yeah, so I just thought it was worth, I suppose, accentuating that a bit more. And then also another thought I had about funding community infrastructure, and this time it was really the cycleways, is because that is highlighted in a few places as well. I think we should be looking at a visitor levy to try and get our visitors to provide some of that funding. And it doesn't have to be limited to cycleways, actually. It could be Te Arawai, it could be our swimming pools, you know, like Airbnb have committed to doing it already. So it's an option. Like, I'm an Airbnb host, and I could put that in my listing right now. Okay. Now, I appreciate that that's not the only source of visitor income, but I think we should be exploring it, certainly in the 30-year plan. Yeah, if not sooner. That's okay. I think that's enough for me for the time being.
So what if I kind of reflected in here around kind of exploring a range of tools that we might have available to assist in generating funding and revenue for some of the activities?
And it does build on what the Infrastructure Commission has signalled about. We should be getting a bit more creative with how we fund our infrastructure.
Right, sorry. Thanks, Claire. Any other comments at this point?
Cool. And we don't currently have this in our infrastructure strategy, but we thought it would be worthwhile just to actually kind of have some kind of clear goals in place for how we manage our infrastructure and some of our areas of focus. So we've kind of just talked about, and that they're all pretty kind of straightforward, I guess, but kind of looking after what we have. So again, coming back to that kind of whole renewals, understanding our asset information, looking at kind of backlogs, understanding where that exists and how we might respond to it. Continuing to meet our level of service and kind of community expectations, transitioning to a sustainable future. So kind of recognising obviously impact of climate change, low emissions, low waste and all that kind of stuff, and everything that you're already kind of doing in that space, and resilience. Responding to a changing operating environment, so recognising all the stuff that's kind of happening, particularly from a central government point of view and what that kind of means to us, as well as investing in growth, recognising that it's good for our district, but it also has some challenges. So we've just tried to kind of capture those in a bit of a nutshell. So are you reasonably comfortable with that? And obviously we'll get into a bit more detail as we flesh out the strategy a bit more. Great. Cool. And then this is our kind of attempt again around kind of, we have to do this in the strategy, and it's a really good thing to do, is to kind of get that understanding of some of these big issues that we've got. We know that we're not necessarily going to deal with all these issues in our LTP, probably certainly not from a 3-year perspective or even a 10-year perspective, but it's helpful to have them captured, and we're kind of required to as well, within our 30-year strategy. So we can kind of every 3 years as we review this, we can kind of go, well, did we actually deal with that? No, we didn't. It actually needs to be a focus now. So this section also will be refined as we get a bit more information on our LTP and our approach. But we need to kind of identify some of the options that we have available and implications of those options, and also identify when some pretty important decisions will need to be made in the future as well, so that you can kind of look in future LTPs and kind of go, well, we know in 37 LTP that we need to start making some decisions about X, and X kind of thing. So it just helps to kind of give you that picture. These are the kind of things that we've identified, I guess, at a staff level based on what we know. So, and they might change as we go through the LTP, but just kind of wanting to check in, does this kind of capture most of the things that you're kind of thinking about in the space.
Clear.
Yeah, thanks. I like the list, and that it's really about growth demands and investment that I'd just like to make some comments on that I've been thinking about further. And it's, again, it's based on those Infrastructure New Zealand comments that we should be funding this infrastructure ourselves and be more comfortable with increased levels of debt. And so we have been, I suppose, constrained by prudential benchmarks, which we thought we had to abide by. Apparently, that's not necessarily the case. And so I would like a bit of work done on whether or not we should consider increasing our levels of debt in a prudent way, obviously. But I mean, I did have a chat with Ross Copland about, you know, these special financing vehicles and things like that, which use kind of like a targeted rate approach for people that benefit from infrastructure investment. But he said that they take a lot of time, they're expensive to set up. You could do it just the same with a targeted rate. You could do it the same with the tools you've already got, you know. And so whether or not we should be saying, you know, we might actually review our debt levels. And then with that, how we report our debt. So something that's always struck me is that we have our debt as just a monolithic, I suppose, reporting item. We don't separate out debt that's going to be repaid from DCs, and we don't identify the debt that must be serviced from rates only. I'd really like to see that, because we know that that debt that's in there because of growth assets, it will be repaid from DCs. Who, obviously, we don't know exactly when it'll be repaid, but it's not a responsibility for ratepayers. And I think that that would also alleviate some of the anxiety that we get from our community when they see the huge levels of debt we do have. But of course, it's debt that they aren't actually likely to ever have to repay themselves. So that might be a conversation that we have to have with the Auditor General, actually. Like, this might be a longer term thing that we need to try and get over the line. But yeah, I think the time's come that we should be able to be more sophisticated and about the way we report, and make it more relevant, make it more meaningful, because it shows, you know, the part of that debt. Yeah, I suppose it conveys more information about it. Yeah.
So obviously that's going to be discussed as part of the financial strategy, but both of these things need to talk to each other as well. Like, in a way, the financial strategy is either your enabler or whatever the opposite of enabler is of your infrastructure strategy. So we'll be able to connect those dots as part of that picture. And I guess part of that as well is kind of showing that split between what's growth, what's levels of service, and what's renewals too. But perhaps that discussion around different tools that we will need to have as part of the financial strategy. We've come to an end. Anything else? Anything missing? Was it an easy read or was it a hard read? Just be honest. A lot of information. Yeah. They typically are biggies in your LTP. I will think of ways we've tried to kind of make it as concise as possible, but yeah, it's a work in progress.
I enjoyed it too, Roger. Hey, just on the storytelling, that goes back to my first comment. I think you talk about infrastructure deficit. That could just be a narrative piece, like a sense of where we are sweating assets is a really good thing for the average punter, including me, to know.
So I think the other part of that story is one of the reasons central government has really pushed the Brickworks strategy to run, but didn't do that because we're so that's that cuts to Marcus is really about why would we here the game conference? It's true, because after critical assets,
So yeah, so next steps is obviously the budget discussions. There's further information, so it's going to get bigger just around each activity that'll sit at the back of the strategy. But we're going to keep that pretty concise. We need to ensure that it aligns to the RTP story, the financial strategy, but also keep things agile because we recognise that we're in a changing environment. So yeah, that's where we're at. Thank you.
Awesome. No, thanks, Cheryl and Dawn. Right, our next open workshop is one titled Urban Design. Nicola. Nicola and Wayne. Welcome to the hot seat. Right, everyone. On our agendas, page 50 is the start of the workshop in respect of urban design panels. And Nicola, I believe this is this the last time you'll appear in front of
Yes,
us?
today
Yes,
is
it
my
is.
last day.
Today is actually your last day. Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, well, let's make it a good one, eh?
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
Okay. So I'm just here this afternoon to follow up from the presentation that Tony Quickfall gave a few weeks ago before he left. So we were asked to go back and relook at the urban design panel and whether there was any merit on establishing one for Waipa. So just to put it in perspective and to clarify, so we're looking at urban design, which is the form and function of the urban environment. So architecture deals with the building and the design and construction of buildings, whereas urban design looks at the way that building is placed in the landscape and looks at things such as the buildings, the streets, the parks, and safety and how they all connect to each other. So just as an example, architecture deals with this, the picture on the right side, the apartment building, and then urban design looks at how it relates to the surrounding environment. And so currently at the moment, in terms of the district plan, there are some design guidelines in the structure plans for the new growth areas, but in the established residential and urban areas, there is a lack of urban design guidelines. So there is limited provision for the planners to assess them and push for those good urban design outcomes in those more established urban areas. And in terms of the MDRS, which will enable 3 houses up to 3 stories per site as a permitted activity, then there is limited ability for council to get good urban design outcomes there because they will not need a resource consent. So those are just some examples of development we could get under the MDRS, which could potentially be permitted. Oops. From the resource consent team, I got potential people who might give some input into urban design panel. So I emailed a few developers and consultants and got some feedback. So there wasn't resistance to an urban design panel for Waipa, but they did see that the greatest value of it would be at the pre-application stage. And that it wouldn't be cost prohibitive. So there was mention of being low cost or no cost. But then some did argue that it's fair for them to pay because it is of benefit to them to go through that process. In terms of what should go to an urban design panel, it was very much the size and the scale and whether it sits within the district plan framework. So if it was pushing boundaries, then it was recommended that it go to an urban design panel. In terms of size and scale, that kind of varied a little bit, but there was mention of anything more than 10 houses to go to an urban design panel, which I think is probably a little bit low, and others indicated more bigger developments to go. And also in terms of the panel composition, there was mixed comments there, but generally people thought that there should be a range of experts sitting on that panel. But then that for it to have a planner that provides that guidance to keep them on track and ensure that they are staying within the scope of their feedback. And as well, if our feedback could focus on potential improvements that are within a set criteria. So again, it keeps to a scope. And so I did have a conversation with Hamilton City Council. Unfortunately, they were going to try and come and speak, but they had a commitment at the same time. So in terms of their urban design panel, it's a free service and the members don't charge for it. So the members sitting on the panel volunteer their time. The chair of the panel is usually an architect, and the panel depends on who's available at the time. And then they have a set criteria of referral to the urban design panel. So that would be significant buildings and capital projects in the city centre, community buildings or developments with a community or commercial focus, significant buildings in defined gateway areas, development in defined heritage and character precincts, anything of residential development that's more than 50 units, and then council capital projects and other major public works. So I think if we were looking to establish one for Waipa, some of the steps that we would need to go through to get that going would be to look at the funding. So how is it going to be funded? Is it going to be funded by council, and or if we can get members to volunteer their time, is there going to be a chargeback, an hourly rate, or is there going to be some form of incentive? So if they go to the urban design panel, then there is a reduced development contribution at the time of development. So those are some of the things that we would need to look at initially. And then in terms of the reference, what the panel composition is going to look like, who will be the chair, how are we going to get people on that panel? So are we going to have a registration of interest process? And then looking at the fees, are they going to be free, fixed or actual costs? And then bringing that into the fee schedule. And then how is it going to operate? How regular the meeting is going to occur? Who's going to provide the admin support for it? Is there going to be a trigger list or a set criteria that they need to follow to go to the urban design panel? And then are we going to review the process to see if it's working or not? So do we let it go for 12 or 24 months and then have a rethink about it? Yeah. So any questions?
Liz.
This is Liz's hot topic. Yeah, I'm going to start this off. And in fact, I think that Marie and I were probably a bit hot on this last time. I love the way that the Hamilton City one is working. I connected with them. I know that it works well. They seem like a pretty happy bunch, and the fact that they volunteer their time tells me that they enjoy what they do. And I think the same can be established for Waipa. So that's kind of a starting point I was going to lay out there right front, as I think it should be voluntary. When I talk with developers in Waipa and those associated with this particular industry, they're always most upset at poor design in Waipa, and they want to ensure going forward that we are, or they, as a community, as a business, expertise, that we try to ensure we can lift our game just a little bit for some of the poor urban planning and design that unfortunately has already been built, because there is a bit of it out there. And I know in Cambridge in particular, a lot of new kind of areas that seen a lot of criticism on some of our social media channels. So for me, this is a no-brainer. But I know there's a little bit of work to be done in terms of how we might approach the whole thing, in terms of how we might select people. I'm happy to volunteer my time. I'm sure there's others around this table as well. But why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we offer or look to just provide a little bit of a standard? I know we have our district plan, I know we have all those sorts of things, but this could potentially, just improve what we already have going forward.
Thanks, Liz. Del Marie, did you want to add? No? I'll do that. No.
Yes, through the mayor. It's almost on steroids concept that the Cambridge Community Board had quite a few years ago, trying to develop a charter which was really trying around urban design, but this is 10 times better. And look, and like Liz says, the people that are going to be on this committee or on this group are going to be people with their heart in the right place for their town or for their district. It's only win-win. And to be honest, even if it costs us a little bit, I think in terms of long-term building better, this is a great concept.
Thanks, Mike. Anybody dare to voice a opinion in opposition? No? Claire?
Yeah, well, I wasn't that keen on the idea when it was first put forward, but hearing what Liz says about it working well in Hamilton, and it's on a voluntary basis, so I am a bit surprised about that, actually. I did think there would be an expectation that there would be some kind of cost that would be needed to be fronted by the developer. And Nicola, you said that some of the feedback that you got was that they're prepared to pay that because they feel that the outcome is actually going to be better for them as well.
Yeah, so I think the comments back were that they were prepared to pay for it if it was at the pre-application stage when they still had that opportunity to make those changes at a lower cost.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense to me as well, to have it at the pre-application stage, because they haven't invested a lot of money in the design, but they're getting the guiding principles, or, you know, I suppose off to the, you know, and that first step to come up with something that they know is going to be successful. Okay. Yeah, so I'm just concerned that I feel that the planning department is under pressure. Is this adding something to, you know, their workload that might mean that other stuff can't be progressed, which has also got a high priority? I mean, that's the other side of it, the resourcing of it.
I think if they were having applicants go to an urban design panel at pre-application stage, then essentially that should make their job easier, especially if they're taking on board those comments and building them into their application. Yeah.
Sorry, just one last comment. I hear what you say, Claire, about the developers payment. I just wouldn't want it to be cost prohibitive so developers would think twice, because I think there's too much benefit for us as a district. You know, it's that legacy stuff of actually these subdivisions are here for long after all of us are gone. So I just wouldn't want it to be cost prohibitive for a developer of, say, 20 sections or something goes, oh, actually, I'm going to save some money there, but, you know, I don't have to do it. So we need to incentivize it.
Just ask a point of clarification.
Yeah,
Just quickly, under the Resource Management Act, right, when they're exhaust, do they have to give regard to the urban policy or not? You know,
You
I
mean
just
the
wonder whether that's
NPS?
quantified in law or in,
So the NPS urban design that they do, yeah. So they need to have regard to that.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to make sure
Yeah.
it was.
Well, it seems it has reasonably universal support around this table, which will make you excited, Liz.
Yeah. Look, it's one of those things where urban design is interpreted by every person around this room would have a different interpretation of what that would look like, but a panel will hopefully just provide a better outcome. That's all. I mean, if it's a slight improvement on what we might have been delivered, that's I guess all we can ever hope for.
And to Mike's point, you're a long time living with a poorly designed suburb or subdivision. So yeah, great. There you go.
All right. So this is probably why I'm sitting here, because I have to try and implement the decision, which is fine. So we'll start working on terms of reference and what that panel might look like, and try and shape that up towards this pretty much over the next few months, and ideally have something in place as soon as we can, probably looking at next year, I'd say. And we'll report through to the REG committee, I guess, will be probably the key area in terms of how this goes. But finally, I'd just like to thank Nicola for all the work that she's done. It's been a real busy area in the district plan. There's a heck of a lot of, there's a big program of work. So it's been really significant, and just managing that work and the appeals and being part of various hearings processes has been a tremendous effort. So just firstly like to acknowledge all of that work, and probably wish you all the best at your new job in Waikato Regional Council.
And at the same time, just welcome Peter Skilton, who's sitting over there in the back. Peter, you might want to stand. So Peter is taking the new role, or taking Nicola's role. So yeah, so I just wanted to acknowledge that on behalf of the council.
Thank you for that. Yeah, look, you took the words out of my mouth, Wayne. Yeah, best of luck, Nicola. Yeah, and many thanks for your hard work and guiding us through, as Wayne has indicated, a really busy at least 18 months, very least. So yeah, and best of luck for your future endeavours, and welcome, Peter. Thank you. And that